The quiet student continued to move through the days at school in much the same way he always had, calm and observant. To most people, nothing had changed. He still sat near the back of the classroom, rarely raising his hand, and preferred to spend lunch breaks quietly reading or reviewing notes. Yet, for those who paid attention, subtle signs of his brilliance were beginning to emerge. One morning, during calculus class, the teacher introduced a new concept that many students immediately found challenging. While some whispered to neighbors, glanced nervously at the board, or doodled in their notebooks, the quiet student focused intently. He traced the logic of each step in his mind before putting pen to paper. His notes were precise, neat, and methodical, showing an understanding that went far beyond the surface. At first, a few students glanced at his work out of curiosity, then quickly returned to their own struggles. But a small circle of peers began to notice something unusual. Here was a student who rarely spoke, rarely drew attention, and yet the solutions in his notebook were not only correct but often included creative shortcuts or approaches that none of the others had thought of. It was as if he could see the entire problem laid out in his mind and trace a path to the solution effortlessly. After class, a peer approached him quietly, holding a particularly tricky assignment. The student glanced at it, his eyes scanning the numbers and formulas. Instead of giving an answer immediately, he asked a few questions that guided the peer to rethink the problem. Slowly, the other student's eyes lit up with understanding as he realized the path to the solution. The quiet student nodded and returned to his seat, never making a show of his ability, never insisting that anyone praise him. He simply wanted to solve the problem, to understand it deeply, and, when appropriate, to help others see it too. His teacher had begun to take note. She had always noticed him as a diligent student, but now she started to recognize that there was more than diligence here. There was genuine talent, an ability to process complex problems, see patterns, and create solutions that were both elegant and accurate. She began to think about ways to involve him more in class, though she understood that he did not seek attention. She wanted to find a way to allow his genius to shine without forcing him out of his comfort zone. Meanwhile, among his peers, curiosity about him started to grow. A few students who had dismissed him as quiet and unremarkable were beginning to see glimpses of something extraordinary. They watched quietly as he worked through problems others had given up on, and while some were intrigued, others felt unsure how to approach him. He did not speak much to others socially. His world was often confined to the pages of his notebook, the chalkboard in class, or the occasional conversation with someone who asked for help. One afternoon, the teacher arranged a small group exercise, pairing students to solve a challenging problem collaboratively. The quiet student was paired with one of the more outspoken classmates, someone who liked to dominate discussions and often dismissed others' suggestions. At first, the group struggled. The louder student insisted on trying one approach, while the quieter partner observed carefully, making mental notes but saying very little. When their chosen method reached a dead end, the quiet student calmly spoke, offering a different way to consider the problem. His peer was surprised, initially skeptical, but as the quiet student walked through his reasoning step by step, the solution began to take shape. Slowly, the other student realized that the quiet one had seen something they had all missed. The problem was solved, not through force or argument, but through careful observation, logic, and a steady mind. Even the teacher watched quietly, realizing that this student's influence in class was beginning to grow in subtle yet meaningful ways. At home, the student maintained his disciplined approach to learning. He spent hours reviewing advanced calculus problems, exploring concepts far beyond the school curriculum. He had a personal system, a method of writing down notes, observations, and reflections that allowed him to explore ideas without external pressure. This private practice was where his true brilliance flourished. Here, he could experiment, test new methods, and fully immerse himself in the beauty of problem-solving without distraction. Despite his focus on academics, he was not detached from human connection. He often noticed the struggles of classmates or younger students and offered help quietly. There was no pride or desire for recognition. He simply understood that knowledge could be shared and that helping others understand a concept was as rewarding as solving it himself. Over time, a few students came to recognize his generosity and began approaching him for guidance, even if others still overlooked him entirely. One day, during a particularly challenging calculus session, The teacher introduced a problem that had puzzled even some advanced students. The classroom buzzed with uncertainty, whispers, and frustrated sighs. The quiet student sitting at the back calmly examined the problem, his pencil moving steadily across his notebook. He wrote down potential solutions, checked each calculation meticulously, and then paused, thinking through the next step. He seemed completely absorbed, a calm island amid the classroom chaos. A peer, unable to resist curiosity, leaned over and asked him for help. The student looked up briefly, then gestured for the peer to follow his reasoning carefully. Instead of simply giving an answer, he asked guiding questions, helping the other student analyze the problem from a different perspective. Slowly, step by step, the peer began to understand, eventually solving the problem on their own. A quiet sense of satisfaction appeared on the student's face, not from praise, but from the knowledge that he had helped someone else see what he already understood. The teacher noticed the interaction and made a mental note. Here was a student who not only possessed extraordinary ability, but also demonstrated patience, empathy, and humility. She began to consider ways to challenge him without disrupting the natural way he approached learning. She realized that his quiet presence could have a profound impact on the classroom, if given the right opportunities. Outside of academic exercises, the quiet student also had a deep curiosity about the world. He noticed patterns in everyday life, the way buildings were constructed, the symmetry of nature, or the patterns in numbers and sequences he encountered. These observations fueled his intellectual curiosity, giving him ideas to apply in his mathematical explorations. His mind worked like a lens, capturing details that others overlooked and connecting them in ways that were both creative and logical. Though he remained reserved, there were small signs of recognition from others. A few classmates had begun to see him in a new light, quietly admiring his abilities without necessarily understanding their full extent. Teachers began to seek his input on challenging questions, aware that his insight could illuminate complex concepts for the whole class. Slowly, a reputation of quiet brilliance began to form, though it was limited to those who truly observed him carefully. One day, a new topic in calculus required students to apply multiple concepts together to solve an intricate problem. Many students hesitated, unsure how to begin. The quiet student, however, methodically worked through the problem, testing different approaches in his notebook. He checked each step, refined his methods, and finally arrived at a solution that was both elegant and correct. The teacher reviewed his work and could not help but feel a deep respect for his intellect. As the weeks passed, the quiet student continued to demonstrate his abilities subtly but consistently. His classmates noticed that he often had the answers before they did, yet he never boasted or sought attention. His approach inspired a few of them to try harder, to think more deeply, and to appreciate the value of patience and careful observation. Though many still underestimated him, the impact of his quiet brilliance was beginning to ripple through the classroom. At home, he continued to expand his knowledge, exploring topics that went far beyond what school required. He solved complex calculus problems, delved into mathematical theory, and explored connections between different areas of study. His personal journals were filled with observations, notes, and reflections that captured his thought process in detail. These journals were not for anyone else. They were a private record of growth, understanding, and the joy of discovery. Even as the school year progressed, the quiet student maintained his balance between academic focus and human awareness. He noticed when peers struggled, quietly offered guidance, and observed patterns in behavior and learning. He understood that brilliance was not just about solving problems, but about reckoning. The school year had moved along quietly for the student, with days filled with study, observation, and subtle moments of brilliance. Yet one afternoon brought something different, a challenge he had not encountered before, one that would test not only his intellect, but his calm demeanor in the public eye. It began in calculus class when the teacher announced an upcoming school-wide mathematics competition. Students whispered excitedly, discussing teams, strategies, and possible winners. The room buzzed with anticipation and nervous energy. While most of the students focused on their own preparations, the quiet student listened attentively, analyzing what such a challenge might involve. He had participated in classroom problem-solving before, always quietly, always effective, but a public competition added a new dimension. It would be witnessed by teachers, students from other classes, and possibly even the principal. The pressure of performance, coupled with his usual reserved nature, made the situation unusual. Yet he felt a spark of curiosity. This was not about recognition for him. It was about the opportunity to truly test his understanding and skills. Over the next few days, the student prepared quietly. While others crowded the library in noisy groups, he found a secluded corner, laying out his notebooks and reference materials. He reviewed advanced calculus concepts, testing himself with problems far beyond the level expected for his grade. He worked slowly and carefully, checking each solution and reflecting on different approaches. His preparation was thorough, not for praise but for the satisfaction of mastery. On the day of the competition, the school auditorium was filled with students, teachers, and spectators. The atmosphere was tense and electric. Competitors fidgeted nervously, whispering strategies and practicing problems one last time. The quiet student walked in as usual, calm and collected, carrying only his notebook and pencil. He did not seek attention, and yet his presence was quietly noticed by those who had observed his past achievements. As the competition began, the first few rounds went as expected. Students tackled increasingly difficult problems, some confidently, others with visible hesitation. When it was the students' turn to solve a particularly challenging calculus problem, a moment of silence fell over the room. The question was one that many had already attempted unsuccessfully. Some whispered doubts, assuming that his quiet nature would prevent him from performing under pressure. The student, however, did not show any signs of stress. He read the problem carefully, his eyes scanning every detail. The audience watched as he lifted his pencil and began working methodically, writing step by step, checking each calculation, and considering multiple approaches in his mind before committing to the final solution. His movements were calm, deliberate, and precise, almost meditative. At first, some students whispered among themselves, skeptical that someone so quiet could tackle such a problem with confidence. They had seen him solve homework and classroom exercises, but this was different. This was a test in front of peers and teachers, a public demonstration that could not be ignored. The student remained unfazed. He did not glance at the audience, did not react to whispers or stares. His focus was entirely on the problem before him. Minutes passed as he worked. The pencil moved steadily across the page, sometimes pausing, sometimes erasing a line to adjust an approach. The audience began to notice the care and precision of his work. Unlike others who rushed or hesitated, he seemed to navigate the complexity of the calculus problem effortlessly, breaking it down into smaller, manageable steps. A teacher in the front row leaned forward, observing closely. She had seen his talent in the classroom, but seeing it applied under pressure was different. She realized that this student's genius was not only in his intellect, but also in his composure, patience, and methodical approach. It was rare to witness someone so young handle a complex challenge with such grace. As the student progressed, whispers of amazement spread among his peers. They saw the neat logical progression of his solution, the way he connected different concepts and how he arrived at a correct answer when many others had struggled. Some began to understand that his quiet nature was not a sign of weakness or lack of ability. It was simply the way he approached the world. Finally, after several tense minutes, he completed the problem. He placed his pencil down and waited calmly, offering no reaction to the audience's murmurs or the teacher's approving nods. When the solution was checked, it was found to be not only correct but elegant, showcasing a depth of understanding that few could match. The auditorium filled with quiet astonishment. Some students clapped softly, while others exchanged looks of disbelief. The teacher smiled, understanding that this moment revealed the full extent of the student's abilities. Despite the recognition, the student remained composed. He did not seek applause, did not boast, and did not make a scene. To him, the satisfaction came from solving the problem, understanding it fully, and knowing that his preparation had paid off. The public demonstration had been a challenge, yes, but it had also been a confirmation of his skills and dedication. In the days that followed, the event became a topic of quiet conversation among students and teachers. Many who had previously underestimated him began to see the value of observing and understanding the quieter members of their community. His peers realized that talent does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it exists beneath a calm exterior, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The student, meanwhile, returned to his usual routine. He walked the halls quietly, attended classes, and studied diligently in the library. Nothing about his demeanor changed. The recognition he had received did not alter his habits or goals. For him, the joy remained in the pursuit of understanding, in the satisfaction of solving a challenging problem, and in the quiet knowledge that he had met a difficult challenge successfully. Yet the experience left a subtle impact on his peers. They began to approach him with more respect and curiosity, seeking his guidance on difficult problems. Some students, previously dismissive, realized that there was much to learn from him, not only in terms of calculus but also in terms of approach, patience, and perspective. His quiet confidence became a model for those who struggled with self-doubt or impulsive thinking. Teachers, too, took note. They began to provide more opportunities for him to showcase his skills in a supportive environment, encouraging him to participate in competitions, mentorship programs, and collaborative projects. They recognized that his brilliance could inspire others, and that providing him with challenges would allow his talent to flourish even further. One afternoon, the student was asked to assist in a problem-solving session for younger students. As he guided them through a challenging calculus exercise, he remained patient, asking questions that prompted them to think critically, rather than simply providing answers. The younger students began to understand not only the concepts, but also the importance of careful analysis and methodical thinking. The quiet student's influence extended quietly yet powerfully, shaping minds without seeking recognition. Even outside of structured academic settings, he continued to explore mathematical ideas. He spent hours on his own, experimenting with advanced problems, discovering new patterns, and testing his understanding. His notebooks were filled with solutions, reflections, and insights that documented the growth of his mind. These personal explorations were a private joy, a space where he could challenge himself fully without concern for external validation. In the classroom, the ripple effects of the competition continued to show. Peers who had once ignored him now approached with curiosity and respect. Some students, inspired by his calm and methodical approach, began to adopt similar strategies in their own problem-solving. Even those who did not fully understand the depth of his abilities began to recognize the value of observation, patience, and careful thought. The quiet student, however, remained unchanged in his demeanor. He did not seek to be a role model or a figure of admiration. His focus remained on understanding, problem-solving, and quietly helping those who sought his guidance. Recognition, when it came, was merely a byproduct of his dedication and talent, not the goal itself. After the competition, the quiet student returned to school the next day with the same calm presence he always had. Yet there was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. Peers who had barely noticed him before now exchanged quiet comments and glances whenever he passed by. Some approached him cautiously, curious about the methods he had used to solve the problem. Others, inspired by his focus and composure, began reconsidering how they approached their own studies. Despite all this attention, the student carried on as usual. Indifferent to whispers and admiration, the teacher, who had been observing him closely for months, decided it was time to provide a more significant opportunity. She invited him to participate in a regional mathematics workshop, a chance to solve challenging problems alongside other gifted students from different schools. While many students would have felt overwhelmed by the prospect of performing in an unfamiliar setting, the quiet student simply accepted the opportunity. He was not motivated by recognition or praise, but by the challenge itself, the chance to explore complex concepts and push his own understanding further. Preparation for the workshop was intense. Other students spent hours practicing and comparing notes, sometimes arguing about the best approaches. The quiet student, however, followed his usual routine. He studied alone, exploring advanced problems, analyzing patterns, and testing methods in his notebooks. His approach was deliberate and thoughtful, never rushed, never impatient. Even as others debated and stressed, he remained composed, confident in his ability to tackle the challenge in his own way. When the day of the workshop arrived, the quiet student entered the room quietly, finding a seat at the back. The other participants, many of whom were outspoken and competitive, looked around at each other, sizing up the competition. They noticed him only briefly, assuming that his reserved demeanor meant he was unlikely to make an impact. They could not have been more wrong. The workshop began with a series of complex problems designed to test both speed and analytical thinking. Many students rushed to provide answers, sometimes making careless mistakes under pressure. The quiet student, in contrast, moved deliberately. He read each problem carefully, considered multiple approaches, and then wrote down his solutions with precision. His notebook became a landscape of logic, patterns, and careful reasoning. By the end of the morning session, whispers began to circulate among the participants. The quiet student, who had barely spoken, was consistently submitting correct and elegant solutions. Some of the more confident competitors began to feel challenged, not only by the problems themselves but by the calm, steady presence of someone who worked so differently from them. His methods were not flashy or loud, but they were effective, demonstrating a level of understanding that few could match. During a break, one of the participants approached him, curiosity evident in their expression. "How do you do it?" they asked quietly. "You never seem rushed, and your solutions are always correct. What's your secret?" The quiet student looked up calmly and smiled faintly. "I just think carefully," he said simply. "I take my time and make sure I understand each step before moving on. That's all." He did not boast, did not provide a formula for success, and did not seek recognition. His words were modest, yet they carried weight for the person listening. A reminder that skill and patience often matter more than speed or noise. The afternoon session brought the final challenge, a problem that combined multiple concepts and required deep reasoning. Many participants hesitated, unsure how to approach it. Some tried to rush through it, while others debated potential methods aloud, growing increasingly frustrated. The quiet student, as always, approached the problem methodically. He broke it down into smaller components, carefully tested each step, and gradually pieced together a solution. His calm focus drew the attention of the instructors, who quietly observed the elegance and accuracy of his work. When the solutions were reviewed, the quiet student's work stood out. His approach was not only correct, but also showed creativity and insight that impressed both teachers and fellow students. The other participants, many of whom had initially dismissed him, now looked at him with a mixture of admiration and surprise. The quiet student, however, did not react to their expressions. His satisfaction came from solving the problem and understanding it fully, not from the recognition of others. The instructors invited him to explain his reasoning to the group. He stood and walked to the front of the room, speaking clearly and logically, guiding the audience through his thought process. While some students struggled to follow at first, they soon realized the brilliance behind his methodical approach. He demonstrated that even the most complex problems could be solved through patience, observation, and careful reasoning. By the end of the workshop, the quiet student had earned respect and recognition from participants and instructors alike. Yet his demeanor remained unchanged. He returned to school with the same calm, quiet presence, focused on learning rather than accolades. The experience had reinforced an important lesson, that true talent is not about showing off or seeking attention, but about mastery, understanding, and thoughtful application. Back in his classroom, the effects of the workshop began to ripple through the student body. Peers who had witnessed his success began to approach him with questions, eager to learn from his methods. Some students, inspired by his calm and effective approach, started adopting similar strategies in their own problem-solving. The quiet student did not seek to teach, but when asked, he guided others patiently, prompting them to think critically and explore solutions independently. The teacher observed these changes with quiet satisfaction. She realized that the student's influence extended beyond academic results. His approach, humility, and composure had begun to inspire others, demonstrating that greatness does not need to be loud or boastful. Through his example, classmates began to appreciate patience, careful thinking, and the quiet pursuit of knowledge. One afternoon, a particularly challenging classroom problem left most students frustrated. The quiet student worked at his desk, pencil moving steadily, his notebook filled with careful calculations. A classmate who had struggled with the problem approached him cautiously. "Can you help me?" they asked. The student nodded and asked a series of guiding questions, leading the peer to see the solution through their own reasoning. He did not give the answer outright, but facilitated understanding. By the end, the classmate solved the problem and looked up at him with genuine gratitude. The student simply nodded, satisfied that he had helped another person discover the solution for themselves. Outside of the classroom, the quiet student's reputation continued to grow. Teachers recommended him for advanced programs and competitions. Peers sought his guidance on difficult problems, and a small group of students began to observe him closely, inspired by his approach to learning. Yet he remained unchanged in his demeanor. Recognition while present was never his goal. He remained focused on the work itself, the pursuit of knowledge, and the quiet joy of solving challenging problems. In his personal time, he continued to explore complex topics independently. He studied calculus and advanced mathematics far beyond what was required in school, testing himself with problems that even older students found difficult. His notebooks became a record of discovery, filled with reflections, alternate methods, and detailed explanations. This private study was where he felt most alive, where his curiosity and intellect could roam freely without distraction. The quiet student's approach began to influence the broader school culture. Other students, noticing his success and the calm way he approached challenges, began to value patience, careful reasoning. The school halls were quiet in the early morning, filled only with the soft echo of footsteps and the occasional murmur of students who had arrived early. Among them walked a boy who rarely drew attention to himself. He was quiet, reserved, and preferred to keep to the edges, observing rather than participating in the chatter and noise that surrounded him. Yet beneath that calm exterior lay something extraordinary, a mind capable of grasping concepts that others found challenging, and seeing patterns where most could not. He was known in the classroom as someone who never spoke unless spoken to, someone who seemed to glide through his day with a steady, unassuming pace. Teachers had noticed his careful attention to detail, the way he approached problems methodically, and how he often completed difficult assignments with ease. His peers, on the other hand, mostly overlooked him. They assumed that quiet meant ordinary, that calmness was a sign of simplicity. Few suspected the brilliance that lay beneath his composed demeanor. It began with small moments of insight. During a calculus class, while the teacher explained derivatives and limits, most students were frantically taking notes, trying to keep pace with the lecture. The quiet student listened attentively, absorbing the information not as a task but as a puzzle to be understood. When a particularly challenging problem was presented, he solved it on his own notebook before the teacher could even finish writing it on the board. His solution was precise, clean, and elegant, showing not only accuracy but also a deep understanding of the underlying concepts. Some classmates glanced over and noticed, whispering to each other. "Did you see that?" one said. "He did it faster than anyone else." But such whispers faded quickly. No one was sure what to make of it. He did not seek attention, nor did he explain his methods aloud. To him, the work was personal, a challenge he met quietly without needing recognition. Outside the classroom, his life was much the same. He moved through the school day unobtrusively, carrying a small notebook wherever he went. This notebook was not for grades or assignments. It was a place where he explored ideas, solved problems, and recorded thoughts that fascinated him. Calculus was more than a subject. It was a language he understood intuitively, a tool to see the patterns and structures hidden in numbers. Lunch breaks offered him no social gatherings. Instead, he found a quiet corner of the cafeteria, opened his notebook, and worked through complex problems. While others laughed and talked loudly, he focused on derivatives, integrals, and equations that challenged even the most advanced students. He did not mind the solitude. It was in these quiet moments that he felt most alive, most connected to the world of mathematics that he loved. Teachers had begun to take note. They recognized not only his intellectual ability but also the way he approached challenges with patience and thoughtfulness. Unlike students who rushed through problems or sought shortcuts, he took the time to understand every detail, to see connections that others missed. His calm demeanor masked a sharp, analytical mind that had the potential to achieve great things if nurtured properly. One afternoon, the calculus teacher decided to give the class a particularly difficult problem, one that involved multiple steps and required creative thinking. Most students groaned, uncertain where to begin. The quiet student, however, simply opened his notebook and began working methodically. Step by step, he approached the problem, testing different methods, considering each possibility carefully before moving on. His pencil moved steadily across the page, erasing and rewriting as he refined his solution. When the teacher walked around to check on students' progress, she stopped at his desk. She watched quietly as he worked, noting the clarity of his logic and the precision of his calculations. "Impressive," she whispered to herself, realizing that his understanding went far beyond what the average student could achieve. She had suspected his talent for some time, but seeing it applied to a particularly complex problem confirmed it. The rest of the class struggled to keep up. Some whispered frustrations, some asked for hints, and others gave up entirely. Yet the quiet student remained composed, focused only on the problem at hand. In a room full of noise and distraction, he existed in a world of his own, a world governed by logic, reasoning, and careful analysis. Word began to spread slowly. A few classmates who had observed his abilities began to approach him, asking questions about his methods. He answered politely, never arrogantly, but in a way that encouraged them to think for themselves. He never gave the answer outright. Instead, he guided them through reasoning, helping them discover solutions independently. It was a subtle form of teaching, quiet but effective, revealing his talent not only for understanding complex mathematics but also for encouraging others to grow. Outside of school, he continued his quiet pursuit of knowledge. His evenings were spent at home with notebooks and textbooks, exploring calculus problems that went far beyond the school curriculum. He challenged himself with exercises that required deep understanding and creative thinking. While other students might have been content with grades or classroom success, he sought mastery and comprehension, driven by curiosity and an internal desire to understand, not by the need for recognition. Occasionally, he would share his solutions with a teacher who marveled at his insight and depth of understanding. They encouraged him to participate in competitions and workshops, believing that his abilities deserved a broader audience. The student considered these suggestions thoughtfully, but remained primarily focused on learning and discovery. The idea of public recognition was secondary. The true reward was in understanding the mathematics itself. His quiet confidence set him apart in subtle ways. In group work, he often observed and analyzed before speaking, offering insights only when he had carefully considered them. Peers who initially overlooked him began to notice his contributions, realizing that his calm demeanor hid a mind capable of remarkable analysis. The respect he garnered was quiet and gradual, not loud or boisterous, reflecting the understated nature of his talent. Even in social settings, he remained reserved. He was not disinterested in people but preferred meaningful interaction over superficial chatter. When conversations turned to schoolwork, he engaged with thoughtful input, often providing perspectives that surprised those who assumed his quiet nature indicated passivity. His presence became one that others respected, even if they did not fully understand the depth of his abilities. As the weeks passed, teachers began to test him with increasingly complex problems, not to challenge him unnecessarily but to nurture his potential. He tackled these with the same patience and methodical approach that had always defined him. Each problem became a puzzle to solve, each solution a step toward deeper understanding. Through this process, he began to develop a quiet confidence in his abilities, a recognition that, while he might be reserved, his mind was powerful and capable of extraordinary reasoning. One day, the teacher decided to observe him solving a problem in front of the class, not as a test but as an opportunity for others to see a different approach. Some students were skeptical, thinking that his quiet demeanor might translate into hesitance or uncertainty. Yet as he worked through the problem step by step, carefully explaining his reasoning, even the most doubtful classmates began to recognize the clarity and elegance of his thought process. By the end of the demonstration, murmurs of admiration filled the room. Students who had underestimated him began to appreciate not only his skill, but also the manner in which he approached challenges. He had not shouted, boasted, or sought attention. His brilliance spoke quietly, persuasively, and with undeniable impact. From that day forward, a subtle shift occurred in how the student was perceived. Teachers treated him with greater awareness of his capabilities, offering opportunities to stretch his understanding. Young peers began to seek his guidance, realizing that his calm and thoughtful approach could teach them more than traditional classroom instruction. Yet he remained unchanged. His quiet focus, humility, and love of mathematics continued to define him. demonstrating that true genius often does not need to announce itself. As the school year progressed, he continued to explore, learn, and quietly excel. His notebooks grew thick with exercises, reflections, and insights, a private record of his intellectual journey. He took challenges in stride, whether in the classroom, at home, or in informal study sessions. The quiet student's life was one of steady growth, self-motivation, and a deep love for the pursuit of knowledge. It was this consistent, understated brilliance that would eventually shape his path, not through spectacle, but through careful, deliberate mastery. The quiet student had already begun to show the world that true talent does not always demand recognition. It can thrive in patience, humility, and the steady pursuit of understanding. Even as his peers continued to talk and seek recognition for themselves, he remained focused on what mattered most: the work itself, the joy of problem-solving, and the satisfaction of fully understanding a concept that once seemed complex or unreachable. In doing so, he laid the foundation for moments of quiet triumph that would define his academic journey in the years to come. And focus. Teachers observed subtle improvements in classroom performance, attributing part of the change to the quiet student's example. He had become a role model without trying, demonstrating through action that brilliance could be quiet, steady, and consistent. Even as recognition spread, he remained humble and approachable. Students who had once ignored him now sought his guidance, and he met them with patience and respect. He never demanded attention or accolades, choosing instead to lead through example. His calm presence, methodical approach, and deep understanding began to inspire not only academic success, but also personal growth in those around him. By the end of this part of the school year, the quiet student had achieved something remarkable. His brilliance was no longer hidden, his influence no longer limited to whispers in the classroom. Through patience, focus, and quiet determination, he had shown that true talent can emerge in subtle ways, inspire others, and create lasting impact without the need for spectacle, and yet the student remained the same. He continued to attend class quietly, work diligently in his notebooks, and explore mathematical concepts with curiosity and care. Recognition had arrived, but it had not changed him. His journey was about understanding, discovery, and the quiet joy of mastery. The world around him had begun to notice, but he remained grounded, focused on the next problem, the next concept, and the next opportunity to learn and grow. Through it all, the quiet student demonstrated a powerful lesson. Greatness does not always announce itself. It can exist quietly, patiently, and thoughtfully, emerging only when observed with care. And when it does, it has the power to inspire, influence, and change the perceptions of those who witness it. The challenge had revealed something important, not only about his abilities, but also about the perceptions of those around him. It showed that brilliance could exist quietly, patiently, and without fanfare. It demonstrated that talent is not always loud or boastful. Sometimes it is hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself, and it highlighted that those who observe carefully, value substance over show, and respect the calm and diligent can uncover extraordinary abilities. By the end of the day, the student returned home, his mind already wandering back to complex problems and new challenges. The public recognition was brief, almost incidental, but it had reinforced an important truth. The pursuit of understanding and mastery is its own reward. He did not need to prove himself to others. The true measure of his abilities was in the work he produced, the solutions he discovered, and the quiet influence he had on those willing to observe closely. As the days continued, the student remained the same reserved, calm individual who preferred quiet study to social attention. Yet the competition had marked a turning point. His abilities were now known to a wider audience, his influence growing and opportunities beginning to appear. Still, he approached each new challenge with the same patience, focus, and humility that had always defined him. Even as whispers and admiration circulated among students and teachers, he kept his gaze on the work itself. The challenge had been met, but for him, the real journey was just beginning. There were more problems to solve, more concepts to explore, and more moments of quiet brilliance to unfold. And while the world around him began to take notice, he remained unchanged, quietly mastering his craft, steadily preparing for the next challenge that would call forth his extraordinary talent, eyeing potential in others and encouraging growth whenever possible. Though he remained an enigma to most, His influence began to take shape. Teachers appreciated his contributions, peers who sought his help valued his guidance, and a few keen observers recognized the rare combination of intelligence, patience, and humility he embodied. He had not sought recognition, but it was slowly beginning to find him, a quiet acknowledgement of his extraordinary mind. In the library, during long study sessions, he continued to explore advanced concepts, often testing himself with problems that challenged even experienced students. He took pleasure not in praise but in the satisfaction of understanding, in the thrill of solving something others found impossible. His quiet dedication created a foundation for greatness that would eventually emerge when the right challenge arrived. By the end of this part of the school year, the quiet student had established a rhythm. His brilliance was no longer a secret to the few who had noticed, yet he remained humble, patient, and focused. The classroom, once a place where he could simply observe, had begun to recognize the depth of his abilities. Though the majority of students remained unaware, those who paid attention could see that beneath the calm exterior was a mind capable of extraordinary insight, creativity, and problem-solving, and so, the quiet student continued, moving through the school days with careful focus, observing the world around him, helping others when needed, and nurturing the extraordinary talent that lay beneath his reserved demeanor. The foundation had been laid, and though the full measure of his genius had yet to be revealed, the first signs of a remarkable story were quietly taking shape.